Okay, hey everyone. Welcome to today's Studies of Religion lecture. So this is the HSC revision lecture for Studies of Religion. It'll fit for both 2-unit and 1-unit religion. Obviously, if you're doing 1-unit, there's going to be a few things that we look at that you don't have to think about because you're not doing those. But yeah, generally it'll fit for both 2-unit and 1-unit religion. Just a little intro to me. My name's Alice and I'm the lecturer for today. I'll do a little bit more talking about myself a bit later, but I just thought I'd start with a quick little bit about ATAR Notes. So since 2007, ATAR Notes has been offering heaps of free resources to make sure students can do well in their studies, particularly with Year 11 and Year 12. So we've offered these free lectures, like the one you guys are watching today, since 2015, just with the goal of helping students do well in their exams with just another free resource for you guys. So with ATAR Notes, here are some of the free things that we offer that you can find pretty much all of these at atarnotes.com. So if you want some more info or tips on how to use these resources, check out the info doc under the resources section of this lecture page. So ATAR Notes has heaps of free study notes, lectures like these ones, discussions, free videos, free guides from past students, and if you do have any questions after the lecture, best place to go is probably the Q&A where your current and past students like me can answer your questions. Also got an ATAR calculator for if you're reaching that point where you're trying to see what your ATAR might look like. And if you're looking for even more support, we've also got TutorSmart, which is the tutoring platform that's I guess aligned with ATAR Notes. But without further ado, we'll sort of get started on today's lecture. So today's lecture is the exam revision lecture for Studies of Religion. Yeah, that's all there really is to say there. Just a little bit about me before we begin. I'm Alice. I'm currently studying med at the University of Newcastle, which is part of the joint medical program between University of Newcastle and the University of New England. So if any of you guys are interested in medicine, highly recommend coming to Newcastle. So I graduated in 2022 with an ATAR of 99.3. I did only 10 units in Year 12. I was really trying to minimize my workload, so I did 5 2 units. I did bio, echos, English, advanced, maths advanced, and 2-unit religion, which is what most of you are here for today. Religion, and I got a 97 out of 100 in religion, so most of the things I talk about today have been tried and tested in my exams that I did when I was doing the course and seem to have gone well for me. So hopefully you guys can pick up on some stuff to help you in your exam as well. And then I tutor all of these subjects at TutorSmart, and I run the advanced HSC maths class. So yeah, a little bit more about me. It's my second ATAR Notes lecture series. I lectured advanced maths in July. And yeah, just about TutorSmart. I run the HSC Advanced Maths class. I'm the tutor, so if you want to join my class, it's me. And then I also just do some private tutoring for HSC prep as well. So we'll start off. Firstly, congratulations on finishing Year 12. It's a really exciting time, but also the period between now and whenever your last exam is, approximately the next 2-ish months are going to feel super hard. But remember, like, you've done the hard yards, you've learned all the content. All that it is about now is revising that content, doing practice questions, and then sitting that exam, and you're done. If you're feeling super demotivated at the moment, that's fine, and that's normal. Now's just a good chance to refocus and think about how good it's going to sound to hear pens down for the last time. Honestly, nothing as good as that feeling of just doing your last exam, finishing it, and just getting to walk out of your high school for the last time and be done. So just something to remember in this period now between graduation and sitting your exams. Don't let trials define your fate and your confidence going to the HSC. Your HSC exams are going to feel a lot different to your trials because you're going to have done a lot more preparation, you're going to have had a lot more time, and you've already had some experience sitting a proper HSC style exam block. So don't let trials define what goes on from now until the HSC. So in today's lecture, just a little bit of a summary, I guess, of what we're going to look at. The lecture is mostly going to focus on general skills that will apply to both 1 unit and 2 unit religion. Throughout the lecture, I will point out some of the stuff that's not going to apply for you if you're doing 1 unit religion, just because different aspects of the course. So we're going to look at, firstly, revising essential content from the Year 11 syllabus. That's really important that you know going into your exams. We're then going to look at how to structure your faith depth study responses. Then I'm going to look through some key facts and stats to know for the core, being post-1945. And then finally, we're going to look at some study skills as well. If you've got any questions and you're watching this lecture live, feel free to pop them in the Q&A as well as we work through today's lecture. So we're going to begin today looking at some of the Year 11 content. So studies of religion is about the objective and analytical study of the world's religions as a whole, not the subjective beliefs of a specific denomination. In thinking about this, you need to approach studies of religion with an unbiased and holistic mind frame, remembering not to critique or judge the religion itself, only to evaluate the significance of certain aspects of the religious tradition. In saying this, the most common mistake, or the most common pitfall, trap, I guess, that gets a lot of HSC students when studying studies of religion is thinking about Christianity only in the lens of Catholicism, which is sort of where the comment about not the subjective beliefs of a specific denomination come from. A lot of students tend to make the mistake of just focusing on Catholicism as part of the Christianity depth study. If you do have Christianity as one of your depth studies, whether you're for 1 unit or 2 unit, you can talk about Catholicism, and it's definitely an example of a variation or a denomination within Christianity. But it's also important that you incorporate that alongside discussions of other denominations, such as Anglicanism, Pentecostals, Lutherans, any other examples of specific denominations within Christianity. Then when we're thinking about approaching religion with an unbiased and holistic mind frame, another common mistake people make in that sort of situation is talking about a specific religion with personal pronouns. So using things such as I, we, that's another one, you, specific pronouns. Even though you may belong to a certain religious group, in terms of the SOR syllabus, you want to be thinking about yourself as detached, looking into that religion. So you're thinking more about using the term that describes adherence to that religion. So for example, you might have Christians, or you can talk about adherence to Christianity, Christian adherence. You don't want to be saying we, even if that's your religion, because that makes your essays and your short answers a little bit less formal, and sort of you'll miss the mark with the sort of terminology marking points when you're thinking about doing that. And then really important, don't critique or judge the religion itself. The purpose of studies of religion is to evaluate significant aspects of the tradition. So you guys will know you want to be evaluating your person, your practice and ethics. So you just want to be talking about those specific significant aspects of the tradition, and you don't want to input any critiques or any judgments on the religion itself in your short answers or your essays. So we're going to look through some stuff from Year 11, revising some of that content. So we're going to go through what you absolutely need to know from your prelim studies to be able to craft a well-rounded and impressive HSC response. So this is done faith by faith. So if your slides aren't relevant for a bit of a second, because, for what you haven't studied, Christianity, and I'm talking through the Christianity slide, ask some questions in the Q&A for this lecture if you're watching it live. If you're watching the recording, you can sort of skip through the religions that aren't relevant for you. We will start with Christianity because the majority of the state does study Christianity as at least one of the depth studies. But just before we talk about Christianity, essential to depth study responses is an understanding of the principal beliefs of the faith and an understanding of the paradigm that guides the faith. So regardless of whether you're writing an essay or a short answer, and regardless of whether you're writing on your person, your practice, or your ethics, you need to provide your response with structure through the discussion of the paradigm and the principal beliefs of that religion. Your paradigm should be incorporated into your thesis to give your argument a cohesive idea that you can discuss throughout your response, whether you're talking about person, practice, or ethics, and it will help link each of your arguments to one another, which is really important, especially when writing an essay, so you've got a really cohesive response and it doesn't feel disjointed as you move from talking, for example, about your person to your practice. Sorry, I don't know why I keep saying place. Anyway, so the reason that this is so important is because so many HSC questions involve some variation of the question, like how does this religion help adherents live a better life? So this might think about living like a Christian life. You might think about like living a good life, depending, of course, on what religion you're talking about. So essentially, your whole response will ultimately be discussing how specific aspects of each faith actually allow the believer to follow the faith or the belief better. So essentially, this sort of question is just a subtle way of saying, like, how do aspects of this religion reflect the purpose, goal, or message of the religion? So how does, if we were going to reword that in terms of what you know for your syllabus, how does the practice, the person, or the ethics of this religion reflect the purpose of this religion for its adherents? So sometimes you'll get a question that's a little bit more obvious about sort of what you're trying to get at. Phrases you might see if you're talking about Islam is like, how does, the significant person you've studied in Islam reflect the ability of adherents to assist in their submission to Allah, if you're talking about Islam. Keeping the covenant, thinking about Judaism, how does significant practice in Judaism help adherents keep the covenant? Or thinking about Christianity, how does the ethical teachings in Christianity guide adherents to love one another? Things like that, all thinking about your paradigm essentially as the purpose of the religion and what the religion sort of guides their adherents in what they should do in their day-to-day life in order to fulfill the goal of the religion. So it's through adherence to the principal beliefs of each religion that ultimately helps a follower live out the paradigm in their own worlds. And it's the significant people, significant practice, or your ethical teachings that enable them to adhere to these practices. Okay, so you can see it's really important that your principal beliefs are integrated throughout your paragraphs as how the follower essentially lives out the paradigm in their own world. And it's through this significant person, significant practice, or ethical teachings that allows them to follow the beliefs that allow them to achieve the paradigm. Okay, so we want to remember following a person or completing an action isn't just done for the sake of it. Okay, so following a significant person and listening to their guidance, whatever they've said, completing a significant practice or following a particular ethical teaching isn't just done, for fun. We want to be thinking about, why does a faith, whatever faith you're talking about as part of your depth studies, place value on these specific things, okay? And then essentially the answer in general is that it is following the paradigm of that religion. So with your essay responses and your short answer responses, when you're thinking about your depth studies, it is the purpose aspect that you ultimately want to be addressing, okay? And you want your argument and your thesis to address the purpose of a particular religion, and then that's your argument, and it's your significant person, practice, or ethics, depending what the question's asking you to talk about. That's going to be your argument for that thesis, okay? So you don't want to press too much. I don't want to press too much on this topic, but the best way to elevate your response is just to be thinking really holistically about the paradigm of the religion you're talking about. So many students don't do this in their responses, and then they lack that really complex, holistic understanding of their thesis. So they often struggle achieving those top marks in their essay response because their thesis isn't where it should be sitting. Okay, so now that I'm talking about it, probably makes a lot of sense to talk about your paradigm. So just remembering, particularly with your essay responses, you want to outline the paradigm of your religion in your introduction as the thesis idea that you're going to be talking about throughout the response. So then talking about that paradigm links back to the holistic understanding of a religion, essentially showing Nessa that you know what they're trying to get you to do here. You're basically saying Nessa's giving you the information and the content, and you can demonstrate its broader meaning and its understanding in the real world for what this actually means for adherents. Okay, so essentially for example, if we're going to talk about Christianity, which we will in a minute, there's two main paradigms you can talk about: the love commandment or creating the kingdom of heaven on earth. And it's through these paradigms that each of the beliefs sit under that, and then your practice your ethics, then help achieve, adherents to achieve those beliefs, which then helps them to achieve the paradigm. Okay, so then this is all relating to the concept that you would have spoken about when you first read through your syllabus at the very beginning of the Year 12 course about living in dynamic religions. Essentially, your depth studies are all trying to focus on the idea that no matter what religion you're doing, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, that they are all living and dynamic religions. So you always want to be talking about how does this religion get lived out in the everyday, okay? Essentially, the answer to that is through achieving the paradigm. So now that I've spoken about the paradigm for, probably like 10 minutes or so, we'll actually talk about the paradigms for each of the religions. So like I said, we'll focus first on Christianity. So, like I sort of alluded to before, there are two main paradigms with Christianity you want to be talking about. You don't have to talk about both. Usually pick one or the other, depending sort of on what your essay is about, what you feel more confident talking about. So, the first paradigm is the love commandment. So, you want to think about whenever you've got your paradigm, what scripture quote, what scholar quote, what quote from another source sort of backs up the idea of your paradigm. Because when you are talking about the paradigm, you want to have some backup to support you, particularly if you're talking about it through an essay lens. So with the love commandment, if you've studied Christianity, this quote would have come up at some point. John chapter 13, verse 34, love one another as I have loved you. Okay, so then when we're thinking about what actually does the paradigm of the love commandment actually mean, essentially, the core of Christianity is that adherents should interact with their world in the way Jesus would have. So sort of do as Jesus would have done. And that's sort of the idea of the love commandment, is that show love as Jesus would have done. Okay? So that's the first paradigm you might want to talk about. The second one is building the kingdom of heaven on earth. Essentially what that is sort of doing good works and having good faith to create the heaven and the end goal of Christianity on earth, so that there's peace and love amongst the population. So with that, there's all sorts of things that you can fit into building the kingdom of heaven and earth. I would say that paradigm fits pretty well when you're talking about significant practice or your ethics, because they're really focused on what can the individual do to bring about God's mission on earth. Essentially, another way of saying how can they build the kingdom of heaven on earth. So then when we're thinking about principal beliefs from Christianity, we want to try and integrate all 5 of these beliefs within an essay response. Okay, if you're doing a short answer, you do not need to try and do all 5, because it'll just seem silly and you'll be talking about nothing and wasting time. So in a short answer, try and do 1. If it's a bit of a longer short answer, like an 8 mark or something, you might try and integrate 2. In an essay, if you can, try and integrate all 5. Obviously, if it doesn't fit to do all 5 and you've already done 3 of the 5, don't stress about trying to integrate the other 2. The point will come across that you're trying to talk about the beliefs. But yeah, if you just can try and work on integrating all 5 of them, go for it. So we've got the first one being salvation, second one, revelation, third one, divinity and humanity of Jesus, the fourth one being the Holy Trinity, so Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and then finally the death and resurrection of Jesus. So you'll notice that these are the same principal beliefs from the Year 11 syllabus that you would have already looked at in Year 11. So if you can, dig up those Year 11 notes, have a look through the principal beliefs, make sure you've got a good understanding of each of them. Whilst you can't be directly asked on the principal beliefs in terms of saying what is salvation, you can be asked how the principal beliefs are expressed within a practice, how does a specific person talk about the beliefs, or talking about, if you're doing 2 unit, you will also have your principal beliefs come up in religion and peace. So it's really important that you know what each of them mean and how each of the beliefs link to both your paradigm and each of your person, practice, or ethics. So when we're thinking about how does these link to the paradigm, we want to be thinking about how does salvation link to the love commandment or trying to build the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven on earth. So when we're thinking about salvation, the ability that we can eventually go to heaven, or people can eventually go to heaven, then we're thinking about the kingdom of heaven on earth. Thinking about Revelation, God revealing to Christians his word through Jesus, things like that, the love commandment. Okay, thinking about how this has been revealed to Christians as part of God's mission. Divinity and humanity of Jesus can sort of fit into both. Probably best the love commandment, that essentially this is about doing what Jesus would have done when Jesus was on earth. Your Trinity fits both. Thinking about the Trinity can fit anything. And then your death and resurrection probably best fits kingdom of heaven on earth, as it's about Jesus being having died and being resurrected so that Christians can eventually have eternal life in heaven. So then when they are on earth, they have a responsibility to then fulfill the kingdom of heaven on earth. Then you also want to be thinking about, with all of these, where do your beliefs actually come from? With Christianity, fairly simple, your beliefs come from the Bible. And so, yeah, that's about all of the super important stuff from Christianity from the Year 11 syllabus. So I'm just going to leave this up for a second, just while I have a quick drink of water so you can read through it again. Okay. Next, we'll talk about Islam, which after Christianity is probably the most common religion that schools tend to focus on as part of their depth study. With Islam, there's only one paradigm, and if you have studied Islam, you'll probably be really familiar with this paradigm by now, which is submission to the will of Allah. So again, we're thinking about what quote do we have from scripture or from a modern scholar or anything to back up the paradigm that we've got. So in this case, we've got, it is the guidance of Allah which is the true guidance, and we are commanded to submit to the Lord of the worlds. Okay, essentially, submission to the will of Allah just means adherents should show total faith in Allah and His will to follow the straight path. Essentially, that's the entirety of the paradigm for Islam. And you want to be thinking, whenever you talk about your significant person, practice, or ethics for Islam, that you're linking and thinking about how does this help adherents submit to the will of Allah. Then when we're thinking about principal beliefs for Islam, there are 6 main principal beliefs that you'll notice are the same exact beliefs you talk about in Year 11 as part of the Year 11 syllabus. So again, if you've got these beliefs somewhere in your notes in the depths of your computer, go back, have a look over them, read them again. You want to have a really good understanding of the principal beliefs. So when we're thinking about the principal beliefs, you want to be using Arabic terms. It'll help you elevate your response and show a good understanding of the faith itself. So initially, you want to make sure that you do define the term if you are going to use the Arabic term. So essentially, you could write Tawhid, and then the first time you use it in brackets, you say the oneness of God. So Tawhid being our first principal belief. Then we've got Malaika, which is belief in the angels. We've got the books of Allah. Then we've got Rusul, which is about the prophets. You've got Akira, which is the afterlife. And then you've got fate and predestination. And then, like with Christianity, you want to be thinking about how do each of these principal beliefs link to the paradigm? Okay, so how does each of these things help adherents submit to the will of Allah? So essentially, if we're thinking about Tawhid and we're looking at the oneness of God, then obviously this helps submission to the will of Allah because they're submitting to the one God. Thinking about things such as the books of Allah give adherents the messages and the advice that they need in order to follow the straight path and thus submit to Allah. Thinking about fate and predestination. In Islam is the concept that they do have, Islamic adherents have free will, but Allah already knows the decisions they will make. And then thinking about the link of that, so they have to make the decisions to follow the straight path. Then thinking about where do these beliefs actually come from in terms of Islam. So we're thinking about the Quran, the Hadith, as the 2 major sources of the paradigms and the principal beliefs. And we can also think about Islamic jurisprudence. You'll notice that this is in a tiny little font because it doesn't hold the same weight as the Quran and the Hadith in terms of where the paradigm and the beliefs come from. However, it is good and can be another source of quotes and things for the paradigms and the principal beliefs. So that's the key things from Islam. Next, we'll have a bit of a look at Judaism, the Year 11 content for Judaism. So your key paradigm for Judaism is about following halakha law. So essentially the quote we might want to use to back that up is, "You shall teach the children of Israel all the decrees which God told them through Moses," which comes from Leviticus chapter 10, verse 11. So essentially, if we wanted to explain this a little bit more, we could say, so Jewish people should be guided in their religious and daily life by the laws that have arisen since ancient times. Okay, so it's just all about how Judaism adherents should be guided in their life day to day by the laws that were present when the Jewish religion first came to be in the ancient times. Your principal beliefs for Judaism are short and sweet. There's only 3 of them, so fairly simple. You should be aiming to integrate all 3 of these in your essay responses. There is only 3 of them, so if you're doing 3 paragraphs, you can try aim for 1 per paragraph. If you're doing 4 paragraphs, you can repeat one of them in your paragraphs. But the first principal belief is going to be belief in a single God, so essentially the belief in monotheism. The second principal belief is about the moral law as prescribed by God. And then the third belief is about the covenant. With these principal beliefs, they're a lot easier to link to the key paradigms. So belief in a single God, the single God being the one who assigned the halakha law. You've got moral law as prescribed by God, which guides the halakha law, and then the covenant, which following the halakha law helps Judaism to fulfill the covenant being given to them. Then thinking about where have these beliefs come from, where have we sourced our quotes and things from, we're thinking about the Hebrew scriptures. So we're thinking about the Bible and the Talmud. Okay. Thinking about Hinduism. So when we're thinking of Hinduism, we have one sort of, paradigm that helps guide our responses for Hinduism. So our paradigm, again, punya, to transcend samsara. Okay, so we're thinking about a quote here as, "There is neither death nor birth, neither a struggling nor a bound soul, neither a seeker after liberation nor a liberated one. This indeed is the ultimate truth." So if we wanted to explain that a little further, we're thinking about how the purest example of living a good life is accruing positive karma in order to achieve moksha should be the key aim for a Hindu. So when we're thinking about principal beliefs for Hinduism, if we want to try and integrate those into our essay responses, which we should definitely be doing, particularly with the last dot point here, Nessa does give you a few more here of the principal beliefs. Again, like I said, always want to be linking the last dot point in. So thinking about our principal beliefs as Atman and Brahman, the gods and the goddesses, and then Dharma, Karma, and Moksha. And then thinking about how do each of these link to the paradigm of transcending samsara to essentially find the purest example of living a good life. Okay. So then when we're looking at where have these beliefs actually come from, we've got the Vedas and the epics as the sources of our principal beliefs in Hinduism. And then finally, when we're looking at Buddhism, so the key paradigm of Buddhism is to follow the Noble Eightfold Path. So we've got a quote from Buddha here as, "He who walks in the eightfold noble path with unswerving determination is sure to reach nirvana." Again, like with any of the other paradigms, you do want to continue to expand on that and explain it a little bit further. So essentially what this means is Buddhists should aim to be noble in all aspects of their life, so their speech, their views, their resolves, in order to attain the ultimate goal of arhatship and nirvana. So with Buddhism, there are quite a few principal beliefs to manage. So with this one, I wouldn't say it's particularly important to try and do every single principal belief within your essay response. It's good to choose which of the beliefs are most relevant to the person, practice, or ethics you're talking about. And then if you can, sprinkle in the rest of the beliefs throughout the response. Otherwise, it's okay to not stress about including every single one, as as long as each of your paragraphs has at least one principal belief integrated throughout it. So we're looking here, the first principal belief about the 3 jewels. So Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Then we're thinking about the 4 noble truths. So essentially renouncing desires to allow for the ending of suffering and the movement towards the path. Here you'll notice the use of terminology specific to the religion, which is super important. And like if you're doing this with Islam as well, you want to put the actual term, so Tana here, and then in brackets, sort of the English translation of what that word actually means. You'd only have to do this the first time you use the word. After you've used the word for the first time, you can just continue to use it without having to define it each time. Then when we're thinking about the marks of existence, so anicca, dukkha, and anatta, and then thinking about karma, samsara, and nirvana. Again, like with every other religious tradition we're looking at, always going to be thinking about how do those principal beliefs link back to the paradigm of following the Noble Eightfold Path. So essentially what this means is how do each of these beliefs help adherents to Buddhism to be noble in all aspects of their life. So then when we're thinking finally about where have these beliefs actually come from, we've got Tripitaka, Lotus of the Good Law, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead as the sources of the principal beliefs in Buddhism. So just leave this on there for a second. Okay, and so that is the end of the discussion on the Year 11 content that is super important for you guys going into your final HSC exam for religion. It's super important that you've got that Year 11 content down pat, because whilst you might not get a question specifically on the key paradigm will guide your essay response and will elevate it to be a really good, neat Band 6 response, because it covers the purpose of the religion and it gives you something to consistently link to throughout each of your paragraphs, so that even if you're talking about completely separate ideas in paragraph 1, 2, 3, and 4, you've got a key idea that flows through all of the paragraphs, linking them together, allowing you to have a really cohesive response to answer the question that you've been asked. Super important to find a way to link your paradigm to the question that has been asked of you in order to make sure that you get the marks for actually answering the question. So the next part of today's lecture is going to be looking in a little bit more depth at the depth studies. So thinking about how the depth studies should be structured, what you're expected to do, example paragraphs, and things like that. So you've got all the information at this point. You've got your Year 11 stuff, you've got all the knowledge you've done from Year 12. So then you want to be thinking about what's next. And what's next is actually applying all of that knowledge. So just as your information serves as your foundation, your formula, your hypothesis, or whatever other science metaphor you want to use, you want to build from it and you want to apply each of that stuff in your case studies. So then you're essentially looking at the data, which is, leading into my science metaphor here, being your significant person, your practice, and your ethical teachings. So when we're thinking here, we've got ethics, which direct adherents to live consistently with the principal beliefs. As sort of the main idea that'll flow through your ethics response is about directing adherents to live with the principal beliefs. Then we've got person or school of thought, which essentially is an exemplar or a model of how to live by the principal beliefs, which is sort of going to be the key idea that flows through your responses on your person or your school of thought. It's about them being a model. And then you've got your practice, which is a medium for adherents to express your principal beliefs, which again is sort of the main idea you're going to be looking at when you're talking about your significant practice. So NESA actually likes to address some questions that focus on the integration of your people, your practice, and your ethics within one question. So thinking of these in terms of, holistic sort of questions. They're becoming a lot more common. You might not see that they will ask you about all 3 of your things, but you might find that they'll ask you about 2 things, or they'll just give you a really broad question and you get to pick which things you want to talk about. But it's really common for questions to be interrelated to one another. So it's important you know how your ethics, your person, and your practice all link together to create a living and dynamic religious tradition. So when we're looking at this particular example question, so Nessa actually did discuss this question in 2013. So it gives you a living religious tradition, gives you a Venn diagram with your purpose, your person, your practice, and your ethics, showing how they link up in the middle here. So this one is about your person and your practice and your ethics, ethics and your person. And then in the middle here, your person, your practice, and your ethics. So it's got, in your study of religious traditions, you have focused on 3 different interrelated aspects as shown in the diagram. And then you've got 5 different questions here, each on your different religious traditions. So essentially they follow the general pattern. Discuss the relationship between at least 2 of the aspects shown in the diagram on page 16, which is essentially where this came from, and the way they contribute to Buddhism as a living religious tradition. Obviously, this word here for Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism. So essentially here you've got the same question for each of your religious traditions, just obviously changing the wording for each of your questions. Something that I will note here is that this isn't always the case. I think it's a common trap students fall into in thinking that you're going to get the same question for every religious tradition for your essays, and then it's just going to change like the word Christian to Islam or something like that. This isn't true, and you can actually get different essay questions for each of the different religions within one exam. So if you look through some HSC past papers, you'll notice that there are some papers that do this, that the question for Christianity might be about the significant person, and then the question for Hinduism might be about the person and the practice. So don't fall into the trap of thinking all your questions are going to be the same. That being said, in this case they are. So what we're asked here is discuss the relationship between at least 2 of the aspects shown in the diagram. Now, my advice here would be to only do 2. I think it is better to sort of do just the 2, focus on them in a little bit more detail, have 2 paragraphs on each of the aspects you've chosen. So, for example, 2 paragraphs on your person, 2 paragraphs on your practice, and really focus on putting a lot of detail into those responses. I think you can definitely do 3. I think doing both your person, your practice, and your ethics is just a little bit more risky in that you often can't go into as much detail for each aspect that you're talking about, and your essay may feel a little bit short because you've only done 3 paragraphs. With religion and religion essays, I would say always want to be aiming for 4 paragraphs in order to really get the amount of detail that you need across in the response. So I guess that was just a big long-winded way of saying important to know how each of your ethics, your practice, and your person link together. And just another example of how it would be important to actually have a really good understanding of your paradigm. So for example, with Islam, if we're talking about the paradigm of submission to the will of Allah, we can really easily integrate that into our thesis of the response, and thinking about how it's through submission to the will of Allah that adherents achieve through participating in a significant practice and following the model of whatever your significant person is, that adherents are able to actively express their religion in the modern day. Obviously, you'd want to be crafting that thesis a little bit more carefully if you had a little bit more time, but just for the sake of today's lecture, just a quick way of integrating your paradigm into your question that will help you, particularly when you're thinking about more than one of each of these ideas, linking throughout each of your paragraphs, so your response is still really, really cohesive and still quite sustained and logical, even when you're talking about more than one idea. So before we look into the more specific stuff of your person, your practice, or your ethics, it's also worthwhile to look at general principles for your depth studies. So these will apply to your essays and your short answers. And you'll also see that will come up in your post-1945 5-marker or as well your religion and non-religion 5-marker question as well. So just like all your other humanities subjects, if you do any of them, you'll notice just like those subjects, SOR markers value a holistic understanding of the topic, which then incorporates specific evidence to support your arguments. So essentially what that means is that you want to have a mixture of details in your essays and your responses to support the holistic argument that you've presented at the beginning. So thinking about details in terms of studies of religion, your details can take on many different forms. So you can have statistics. The statistics are a little bit more commonly coming up in post-1945 questions, particularly when you're thinking about relating to the census data. Not to say that you're not going to have statistics in your depth studies, because you most definitely can. They're just a little bit more common in your post-1945. Your details can be specific terminology, such as using the Arabic or Hebrew terms instead of English ones. When you're looking at Islam, would be Arabic, Judaism would be the Hebrew terms. So using the specific terms you've got available, such as for the principal beliefs that we looked at for Islam. Your details can also be the most common ones: quotes from scholars, quotes from sacred texts. With your scholar quotes and your sacred text quotes, you want to make sure that they are really, really specific to whatever you're talking about. You don't want to put a sacred text quote in there for the sake of having one if it's got nothing to do with what you're talking about. So whenever you're looking at quotes from scholars or extracts from sacred texts, be super specific with them. And your detail can also be anything else that's going to give you a specific sort of input into your response. So when we're thinking about this, a really strong Band 6 response will have a variety of details integrated seamlessly throughout the response. And a really good Band 6 response will have at least one sacred text quote and one modern scholar quote per paragraph. I would say probably you want to be aiming for more than one, but at least one sacred text quote and one modern scholar quote per paragraph will help you on the way to getting a really good Band 6 essay or short answer response in studies of religion. So if you're a bit like me and you like to think about a bit of a formula to your writing, your studies of religion is constructed, I guess, in a similar way to either of your histories. So essentially, for every 2 marks, you want to be making 1 point, which will be accompanied by at least one piece of evidence or detail. So essentially, an essay should contain 10 points. So sort of thinking about like 3 points for 3 paragraphs. I would be aiming for 4 paragraphs of 3. Better to overreach than underreach. Particularly with religion essays, I think 4 paragraphs should be the standard that you're trying to go for. So then if you're thinking about an 8-mark mini essay, will make 4 points. So I'd probably say 2 paragraphs, each with 2 points in them. A 3-marker response will probably have 2 points in it. Like I said, better to overestimate than underestimate. So if you're in doubt about how many you should do, always round up. Then with your 5 markers, you need to make a minimum of 3 distinct points. To be safe, I'd always try to include 5 points, probably still only 3 bits of evidence, and then your other 2 points are sort of there just as like supporting explanations. But you just want to be making sure that you're hitting each of the marks whenever you've got your responses. So then when we're thinking about timing for religion, and particularly your depth studies, you get roughly 2 minutes a mark for longer written responses. So on the front of your paper, NESA will say, or will recommend spending 35 minutes for the essay. But I would say it's important to try and spend at least 40 minutes for the essay in order to make sure you've got enough time to do 4 paragraphs with enough detail in them for your essay to actually be quite sustained. So this works out to spending roughly 8 minutes per body paragraph. And then that would leave you with about 5 minutes for the introduction and about 3 minutes for the conclusion if you wanted to spend 40 minutes on that essay response. In doing that, I would say it's important to practice writing those short answer questions. Practice writing those paragraphs in 8 minutes so that you know you can achieve 8-minute body paragraphs. If it's going to take you a little bit longer, then you need to account for this and budget your time a little bit different, depending how long you know it's going to take you to write that essay. Then I would say 10 minutes for your section 1 5 marker. if you're doing 1 unit, you only have 1 5 marker. So only need 10 minutes there. If you're doing 2 unit religion, you're going to need 20 minutes to do both sets of 5 mark questions. Then I would say you've got about 15 marks for your section 2 short answers. I'd be probably spending about 30 minutes per set of short answers. So if you're doing 1 unit, that's 30 minutes in total. You only have 1 set of short answers. If you're doing 2 minutes, you're going to be doing 60 minutes in total, 30 minutes for each set of your short answers. And then I would also say 10 minutes per block of multiple choice questions. So 10 minutes if you're doing 1 unit, 20 minutes for 2 unit because you have 2 sets of multiple choice to do. Now with timing, I think I'll share with you my sort of approach to it. It is a bit unique, I guess, in that I always did one of my essays first. The first thing I did when I sat down in that exam was I did whichever essay I thought was going to be harder. The reason for that is because I'm the kind of person who, if I know the essay question is hard, I will spend the entire time thinking about the essay question until I get to doing it. So do the essay first, get it out of my mind, and then I would move on to doing one set of my, or at least one set, that sometimes I would do both, of the multiple choice questions. So my logic behind that was a bit like, okay, I've just written a whole essay. Your multiple choice gives your hand a little bit of time to rest in between writing responses. Because all you have to do is circle the little bubbles and you spend a fair bit of time reading as well, so you don't even have to do anything with your hands for some of that time. So I found it was really good to write my essay, do my multiple choice, and then write my second essay so that I would get the stress out of my head about writing the essays. I always stress about those essays, I don't know why, but get the stress out, have both my essays done, but at the same time, give my hand a little bit of time to rest in between them so that I can still write really quickly doing the second essay as well. If that works for you, it works for you. It might not work for everybody. Some people like to do the paper, completely front to back in order. And if that works for you, no, nothing's stopping you. So just go ahead, do whatever is going to work best for you. So then the most important thing to your depth studies is being able to synthesize your understanding of religious principles and the content you've been taught. So you want to be able to synthesize the paradigm, the beliefs, and the contemporary adherence to a religion with the content that you've learned about the person, the practice, or the ethical teachings. So your thesis for any extended response or essay should directly link into the beliefs or the paradigms that will help adherents achieve what you're talking about. So that'll help you keep you on track. Again, helps give you a really cohesive response, really complex, holistic understanding of whatever religion you're talking about. So I would always say it's worth opening up the very first line of an essay with an explanation of the paradigm of that religion. And then because your significant person, practice, and ethical teachings are actually support for your argument, you want to ensure that you can discuss the nuances of each of your person, practice, and ethical teachings in a way that still supports the original point you're making while still building on a really good, solid response. So, if it sounds difficult, don't worry. We will go through how to do this. First thing you want to do, introduce the big idea first before you move into your discussion of something specific innate to your person, practice, or teaching. So for example, start with a non-specific statement about your person, your practice, or your teaching that links to your paradigm. Then about halfway through your paragraph, you want to then thinking about link whatever you're talking about and link its significance back to the faith and back to the paradigm. If you're only doing it at the beginning of the end, it becomes a little bit, forced. It comes off to the marker as you're only doing it at the beginning and the end because you have to. So you want to be thinking about linking back to your paradigm, the significance of the faith, about midway through the paragraph. So from there, you want to show how this might be achieved in practice. So then after you've spoken about the significance to the faith, you want to talk about a specific denominational nuance or a more general modern example. And then you want to finish up your paragraph with a judgment. Now, this judgment is not a judgment of the religion. It is not saying something is good, saying something is bad. It's more about a judgment of the significance or the importance of whatever your particular person, practice, or ethics is that you're talking about in the paragraph. Your question will guide you sort of on what you want to be making your judgment on. So for example, if the question's like discuss the significance, then you want to be, at the end, provide a judgment on the significance and that sort of thing. So then roughly you want to be following this sort of pattern. So one body paragraph should equal one contribution or one impact. This is being specific to your significant person. So yeah, one body paragraph is one contribution or impact of your significant person. Each of your paragraphs should have a new point. So essentially each paragraph should talk about a new and unique contribution that your significant person has made. You want to be using at least 2 to 3 quotes. They can come from all sorts of places, and you want to have a bit of a mix of sources of your quotes. So you want at least 1, probably 2 sacred text quotes. With your significant person, it's not always going to be the Bible because not every religion uses the Bible. So that might be the Bible, it may be the Quran, or something like that, whatever is relevant for your specific religion. So then you want to use at least 2 to 3 sacred text quotes, and then I would say also want to be using at least 2 other quotes from a person, a figure, a statement, something other than the sacred texts. This just gives you a really good nuanced understanding of the modern religion as well. When you're thinking about your topic sentence, you want to make sure it relates to your main idea. If you have practiced writing essays with the paradigm, you will find it super easy to link your topic sentence that you sort of already know you want to use back to the question that you're being given, so that nothing is super unexpected. Then you want to finish every paragraph really conclusively. So you want to have at least like some kind of final judgment. If your directive verb is about like assess, discuss, analyze, or if it's not that kind of directive verb, at least some kind of summary of what you've spoken about in the paragraph. Then don't get caught up in biographical details. So yes, they are important for your understanding, but you won't get too many marks, for telling me when your significant person was alive and where they lived and, what their mum's name was. You'll get more marks for talking about the actual contributions. So you want to focus your energy on remembering and talking about the actual contribution. When you're thinking about religion, it is a lot of writing. So you want to be trying to minimize the amount of words that you're wasting. Some words that immediately I can say are going to be wasting is usually biographical details. It's okay to say, some general figures about the person was alive in this time period, but that's the most you'd want to be saying about that. Then with your person, super important to remember to link the impact of that person to modern day Christianity and link the contribution to the development or expression of Christianity. You should also, as always, be linking to the key paradigms, the key beliefs, and the key teachings throughout your response. So we'll have a bit of a look at a framework for answering depth study questions on the significant person. So the first thing we're looking at is the faith's worldview or the paradigm. This will usually get introduced in your introduction if you're talking about an essay. If it's a bit of a longer short answer question, it may be worth talking about this as well. Then we're looking at the role of the person in this worldview and their context, usually as sort of your opening sentence in your paragraph. Then talk about their specific contribution, making sure you integrate sacred text and theologian quotes to support this importance. Really important here that your contribution is super, super, super specific. So what did the person or your school of thought actually specifically do? Then we're moving on to what impact does this have on the religion? Then link this back to how it continues to impact that religion today and the adherents of that religion today. Link it to the paradigm, and then if it fits or if it's relevant, link that to the significant practice and ethical teachings if it's in an essay. So essentially you'd want to just be linking back to any other ideas you may be talking about with the essay. With the last point, only do it if it fits. If it doesn't fit or it doesn't seem organic, don't stress about it. You don't have to include that to get a good band 6 response. So we'll have a look at a practice response for a significant person now. What I'll do is just give you about 2 or 3 minutes, have a quick read through this, and then we'll look through this together as well. Okay, so the significant person Imam al-Shafi, 767 to 820, further highlights how Islam assisted adherents with daily living, showcased by his contributions to jurisprudence. During Shafi's time, there were two conflicting schools of Islamic jurisprudence, the Hanifi school, which used qiyas for decision-making, and the Maliki school, which used the Quran and Hadith. As this was creating divisions within Islam, which causes strength to disappear, Shafi created his own school of fiqh to unite the schools through a new process of reasoning, which his book Al-Risala outlines. The key sources, he argued, are the Quran, Hadith, Ijma, and Qiyas. In united the two schools in a balanced manner. He also unified Islamic beliefs and prevented the legal system of the time from breaking away from the mainstream. This process developed, strengthened, and grew as it still exists today and provides guidance for issues still to come for future generations to follow, regardless of era and context, assisting adherents to remain on the straight path. Subsequently, he helped adherents perform better deeds to enable them to achieve akira, exemplified by 29% of Sunni Muslims worldwide following his school today. This is exemplified by scholar Hamidullah arguing that Shafi's most important contribution was that he united the two schools. For example, the process of qiyas can be used to determine the answer to a modern bioethical issue like abortion, with consensus thus determining that it is haram due to the principle that it is God who gives life. The only thing missing here is just a link sentence at the end, but you'll see we start off here with an opening sentence about Imam al-Shafi with only a little tiny bit of biographical detail. So we just have an opening sentence that answers the question in terms of the topic we have introduced. Then we have introduced a specific problem that needed rectifying. Okay, so here we've got the two schools of thought that were at conflict. Then we outline here, why was this a problem? The next thing we do is specifically talk about what al-Shafi did, or in whatever case you're talking about for your particular depth study, outline what they actually specifically did to reunite and to create a sort of solution or a contribution to the problem at hand. Then talking about how this has continued to impact adherents today, and then here we've brought up some variations within Islam. Then we've continued to talk about how this can be applied, integrating something else, another area of our depth study, in this case bioethics as a specific ethical teaching. And then the only thing we would include here is the final link sentence about relinking back to the paradigm. So you then are going to notice you can structure your notes around the key impacts, contributions that the person made. So you want to aim for 4 individual ones, but 2 ideal ones. Essentially, the idea of having 2 ideal ones comes from the hope that your essay will be integrated with another topic, so you'd only need to talk about 2. So we've got what was the contribution, we want to give a little bit of detail, get a scripture quote, modern impact, link back to the belief or paradigm, and you can think about immediate impacts as well as lasting impacts as well. So if you structure notes around each of these key points, it then becomes super easy to build your responses and your practice questions from there. So next we'll look at significant practice. So similar to your paragraphs on your sick person, you want to be analysing how your prescribed practice allows the adherent to better connect with their faith, and how does it express the beliefs and what is its significance to the faith. So when looking at the significant aspect of Ness's task, it's slightly different, but can best align with the impact of the significant person study. So what is the ultimate consequence in the modern world of the significant practice, and why do adherents continue to participate in this significant practice? With your significant practice essays, you do need to be able to broadly describe the practice itself, and then have small aspects of the practice that are an easy way to structure your paragraph or ideas. So we'll have a little bit of a look at how we can structure our significant practice responses. So we can start by looking at what is the faith's worldview, thinking about the paradigms, beliefs. Again, if you're doing an essay response, you've probably already talked about this in your introduction, and you don't need to do it in your paragraph on the significant practice. So then we want to be talking about the role of the practice in whatever worldview and the sources of this practice. Then think about a specific aspect of the practice itself. For example, if you're looking at Hajj, thinking about a specific rite of Hajj, such as entering the state of Ihram, as being a specific aspect of the practice. When we're talking about and explaining the specific aspect, we want to integrate sacred text and theologian quotes to support the importance. Then, thinking about the impact on the individual or community. Your question may specify, talk about the impact on the individual, or talk about the impact on the community. So obviously you may only be doing one of these. If it doesn't specify, assume that the question wants you to do both. Then you can talk about specific denominations and how there are specific aspects of a practice that vary within denominations. Link it back to your paradigm, and then again, if it fits, link to the significant person and the ethics if you're in an essay and it's going to fit. So we'll have a little bit of a look at another practice response. So I'll give you a few minutes just to read through this, and then we'll go through it. Okay, so looking at this paragraph here, the beginning and ending elements of weekend worship, the gathering and the sending, are integral to understanding Christian beliefs. So here you can see that we've specified a specific aspect of Saturday Sunday worship as part of our depth study on Saturday Sunday worship in Christianity. So then we go on to explain the initial aspect of gathering acts on the key belief of revelation, with adherents making a conscious effort to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, as instructed in the Bible. Thus, the very act of worship allows followers to gain a deeper understanding of their beliefs, taking direct steps to live them out. In the Catholic denomination, this feature of the Mass is often paired with the sign of the cross, a vocalization of the belief in the Trinity, with adherents offering their prayers in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So here we've outlined a specific aspect of the gathering. We've talked about what it means, we've used it as sacred text quote, and then we've also talked about variations. Equally as essential to worship is the aspect of the sending, which literally prompts Christians to go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. An instruction to create the kingdom of God on earth and fulfill their central paradigm. See here, we are specifically relating it back to the paradigm. In a way, this reflects the belief of the divinity and humanity of Jesus, with adherents working to emulate Jesus through the central tenet of evangelizing. Thus, the representative nature of the gathering and sending aspects of Saturday Sunday worship allow Christians to live out their key beliefs and paradigm, gaining a deeper understanding. So you can see here really clearly throughout this response how we have integrated each of the different points that we need to be talking about into the response in a really seamless, good flow paragraph. The only thing I would add in here is just to add maybe a quote from a scholar or a Christian organization that further shows the modern importance and the everyday importance of Saturday Sunday worship, specifically the gathering and the sending. So then we want our notes to reflect the impact of the aspect of the practice. So how do we move from the detail to the impact on the community or the individual? So we want to think about the key area or the impact. So if we're talking about the individual, the detail is tawaf as part of Hajj, fulfill their vows and visit the ancient house. We made this house a recourse for mankind, thinking about scripture quotes that might relate. Then we can think about modern interpretation of how this can be lived out outside of the practice itself, and then link that to a belief or paradigm. So we've got submission, Tawhid, Rusul, and the books of Allah. Then down here we just have some more examples of specific impacts and quotes that you could talk about, or how you may want to frame your responses and your notes when you're thinking about your significant practice. So then finally, looking at ethics. Your ethics section of your depth study is a little bit different to your person and your practice, but it is still involved with explaining teachings and linking them up with contemporary issues. The big thing where a lot of people go wrong with ethics is distinguishing between teachings and issues. Many students get these two things confused, and the distinction or the connections that you can make between the two can make your essay a band 6 or a band 2. Okay? Your ethical teaching is the general principle that you find in the sacred text. Your ethical teaching links to the paradigm. It outlines how an adherent should live their life, and there's no specific issue attached to them. Your teaching can be applied to a number of facets in the world and a number of different circumstances. So for example, if you're thinking about Christianity, an ethical teaching may be, so God created man in his own image. You'll notice here that this does not attach itself to any one specific issue. Similar to your personal or your practice, you want to be aiming to prepare for about 4 teachings so that you could talk about the ethics for an entire essay, 1 paragraph per teaching. Then your ethical issue is the application of the teaching to a modern day concern, such as abortion or euthanasia, as it reflects the sanctity of human life. And so here you want to make your contemporary links to different denominations or social campaigns. With your ethical teachings, it's usually much easier to link to a modern example, because most of your ethical teachings, you'll link them to an ethical issue, which is an example of a modern application. But just want to be specific with linking the applications of these teachings to different denominations or social campaigns as part of the religion. So we're looking at here, again, a similar understanding of how we can structure these responses. So start faith's worldview, paradigm, and beliefs, which usually will come up in your introduction. If you're doing a short answer, it may come up in the paragraph response itself. Then you want to be looking at the role of ethics in this worldview and the sources of ethics. So where have the ethics actually come from? Why ethics important in the particular paradigm? Then you want to think about a specific ethical teaching. Please notice ethical teaching, not an ethical issue. You want your paragraphs to focus on the teaching itself, and then you just have the issue as an example, okay? Your paragraph should focus specifically on the teaching. So then, talking about the teaching, you want to integrate sacred text and theologian quotes to support that teaching, link that to a specific issue, and then link those to specific denominations. So that'll be specific teachings, organizations, or statements that support specific denominations' beliefs about the particular teaching. Then link that back to the paradigm, and like always, if it fits, link that to a significant person or practice if you're doing an essay and it sort of works. So looking at an example, instead of having a paragraph this time, we've just put it in the boxes that we've just used. So if we're thinking about our paradigm for Christianity as being building the kingdom of God on earth, then we want to adhere to the life set in the Bible through which links to Revelation, which allows people to achieve salvation, another belief. So the teaching being stewardship and justice. Take nothing for your journey, act justly, love tenderly, and walk humbly with God. This is thinking about environmental ethics here. So then we're thinking about our particular issue being sustainability and anti-materialism and deforestation. Specific example of how a denomination applies this teaching: Baptist World Aid, shaped by a reading of scripture. Another example, we've got Earth Day, Catholic Climate Covenant, which has a quote, "We can be the main protectors of God's species," allows the people to create the kingdom almost literally. And then you can link this back to a particular person or practice. So we've got Pope Francis, who was inspired by John the 23rd, who believed in social justice. Worship is what allows adherents to understand what they need to do. And then if you want to turn this into an essay paragraph, you just add a little bit more detail into each of those sentences. So then focusing your notes around your key area or your ethical teaching, add some detail, put in a scripture quote, add your modern interpretation, and link that to a belief or a paradigm. And then here is just another example of some sexual ethics notes that you may think about for the teaching, scripture, and then the issue that they're being applied to. So now we're going to have a bit of a look at what to do if your depth study question has a quote. So we've got this question, example from the HSC. You've got a quote: "We truly love God only when we obey him as we should, and then we know we belong to him. If we say we are his, we must follow the example of Christ." From 1 John chapter 2 verses 5 to 6. How does Christianity encourage adherents to follow the example of Christ? So Nessa may include a quote for integration in an essay. It is common, so you do need to be ready to do it, and you will also see that these do come up in like your 5 marks as well, and you may get them if you're doing 2 unit in religion and peace. The first thing to work out is, what is the quote actually telling you on a broad level? So you want to be trying to interpret the quote holistically, so you can attach it to your thesis, and then if you attach it to your thesis, your quote is then going to be constantly integrated throughout your response. And then if you've attached it to your thesis, you don't even really have to worry about that quote, because you're going to be subconsciously talking about it and linking and quoting it throughout the response. So you want to try to respond to the quote as a whole, and this sort of direct referencing is going to be done in 2 ways. The first, engaging with the sort of vibe of the quote, okay? So it's like, if you can tell your quote for example, a Christianity essay is about creating the kingdom of God on earth, without directly quoting it, sort of engage with that vibe and sort of integrate the kingdom of God on earth into your response. Then you will also be able to do direct quotes. So pick out words or phrases to quote that are small, that you can easily integrate through your essay. If you're doing this, you want to make sure throughout the response you've picked out direct quotes from the beginning, the middle, and the end of the stimulus that they've given you, to show that you've engaged with the entire quote and not just one particular part of it. That being said, don't quote just one word from the stimulus. You may as well not do it if you're only going to quote one word. You want to be quoting probably at least 3 or 4 or particular phrases that stand out to you in order to get the marks for engaging with that quote properly. So just as a bit of a summary to the depth studies, some things you absolutely must do. Number 1, link to the paradigm and the principal beliefs. Super important to creating a cohesive essay that shows you've got a really good holistic understanding. Then you also want to be linking to the sacred texts and other theologian quotes to show that you understand that there's a holistic view of the depth study you've chosen. Then you want to link to contemporary examples. So essential for getting a Burn 6, and a lot of people often forget about when dealing with the depth study, especially when you're doing things that aren't ethics. Like I said, ethics is particularly easy in order to get those modern examples in for ethics, but you want to see why the people, the teaching, or the practices are still relevant. So what are their impacts? Give some examples of how it continues to impact modern people today. This can include things like a recent figure's comment, how many people subscribe to a particular point of view, things like that. And then finally, absolutely must link to the diversity of religion, being the different schools of thoughts, denominations. If you're doing Christianity, denominations do not just mean Catholicism. If you only talk about Catholicism, you probably won't get any marks for talking about variations. So make sure you talk about more than just Catholicism. Okay, so that is it for our depth studies. So now we're going to move on to talking about the essentials of post-1945, religion post-1945. So we're thinking about here something that's in common to both 1 unit and 2 unit religion. So the first thing we're going to look at, Aboriginal spirituality, the dreaming. The dreaming, please notice that there is a capital D. You may get a marker that picks up on that if you don't do a capital D. It's a metatemporal view of creation that outlines an inextricable link between land and humans. Essentially, this one sentence can sometimes give you up to 2 marks, depending on the question being asked. Then we're looking at kinship as a spiritual network of relationships that guard responsibilities. So it's a social system that has a hierarchical knowledge system, incorporating the idea that Aboriginal spirituality is totemic and can consist of skin names or moieties. A moiety normally refers to half groupings, however, some nations can have 4 or 8 splits throughout the community. Just with some examples there, Guringai Nation have the crow and the seahawk, and Yolngu people have Yurija and Dua as their moieties. And then your kinship is extended to all living beings in a group as a way of connecting each other to the dreaming. So next, looking a little bit at ceremonial life, that acts as a communication of knowledge in the oral tradition, explaining the dreaming of conferring rights, responsibilities, and sacred knowledge. So female initiations normally follow the monarchy, which is the first period, where a girl is bathed and painted in ochre. In male initiations, ancestral beings are said to ingest the boy and spew out a man, and they normally include some form of body modification. And then another example of ceremonial life is funeral ceremonies form a part of sorry business, where names are not spoken and possessions are destroyed to help the spirit return to the dreaming. So those are some examples of ceremonial life that you might want to talk about. Then thinking about the obligations to the land and the people, these extend from the fact that the land is not only a place of the ancestors, but it is also a connection to an individual's identity. So individuals have specific obligations to the land and to the people. So when we're looking at the effects of dispossession, NESA offers some specific areas to focus on as part of the dot point on the effects of dispossession. But it is also really worthwhile to have some form of general knowledge of dispossession in general. So you've got, as part of the areas that NESA outlines, separation from land, which acts as a direct separation from identity for First Nations people, which the consequences include an inability to carry out ceremonies or to draw on the presence of ancestors, as First Nations people have been removed from their land, which connects them to their ancestors. Then the second area we might look at is separation of kinship groups. So this disrupts and fragments the relationships formed through communities, leading to an inability to pass on knowledge through oral tradition and to learn from elders or share responsibilities. And then this separation from kinship groups creates a void in the life of an Indigenous person in Australia. Then finally, we've got the third area that NESA may outline as one of the effects of dispossession, being the stolen generations. So that is the name given to the policy of separation undertaken by the Australian government. But it is really worthwhile to look more broadly at the policies that were enacted against First Nations peoples and the effect that they had. So these can include the 1909 Aboriginal Act, which made all Aboriginal individuals wards of the state. You can look at missionation or assimilation, which the purpose of which is summed up by the Maribyrnong settlement, the smoothing the pillow of a dying race. And then until the 1967 referendum, Indigenous Australians were defined as flora and fauna, and their voting rights were only officially used for the first time in 1972. So then the stolen generation also includes the separation discussed on the other sides as well. So some long-term statistics to incorporate in a more general effect response. So although First Nations people are 2.7% of our population, they do account for 20% of our prison populations. Only 1 in 10 Indigenous Australians are financially secure. And in comparison to their white counterparts, Indigenous people have about 10 years less life expectancy and suffer from drug-related mental illness at 5 times the rate. So these are some of the long-term effects of dispossession on Indigenous Australians. Then thinking about some quotes you might want to use, you've got the high rate of continuing social dislocation, and Aboriginal imprisonment is the direct result of the separation of children from their families in which the church was complicit. So that comes from the Anglican Church of Australia from the Diocese of Perth. And then from Kevin Rudd, you've got the quote from his historic speech: "We apologise for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering and loss on these, our fellow Australians." So then, moving on to land rights, you've got first looking at Mabo vs Queensland in 1992, which overturned the concept of terra nullius. So the common law of this country would continue to perpetuate injustice if it were to continue to embrace the enlarged notion of terra nullius. So essentially, this Mabo vs Queensland seeks to acknowledge the claim of the Merian people to their land to overturn the term terra nullius. So then, a year after that, the Native Title Act of 1993 was the legal mechanism for acknowledging the decision of the High Court in the Mabo case, and it was a national piece of legislation, essentially meaning that the states couldn't contradict it, and it aimed to provide a national system for the recognition and protection of native title and for its coexistence with the national land management system. So essentially, Western common law in harmony with traditional law of First Nations people in Australia. And then finally, with the land rights, you've got the Wik Peoples versus Queensland, which happened in 1996, that offered a little bit more clarity to native title to essentially show that the leasehold or pastoral land title can and will coexist with traditional claims to the land. However, it was still recognised in the case of dispute between native title and leasehold title that leasehold title will be upheld. Essentially, this is what Nessa wants you to know, that power was transferred to the states, so who could upgrade land to freehold title and extinguish native title. And then the Howard government then passed the Native Title Amendment Act in 1998, which created a 10-point plan about native title. So these were the 10 points that were part of that plan. I'm not going to go through them now, but essentially you don't need to know them. You sort of have to know the general vibe about what that Amendment Act was about. So essentially, the gist of native title is that it's not necessarily all-encompassing, but there was legal acknowledgement that Australia was not empty, and that there were inhabitants with their own traditions. So this rekindling the connection with the land was the first step in returning purpose, direction and spirit for Aboriginal Australians, and it is through the dreaming that these connections were made possible, with stories, songs, knowledge and sites constituting evidence of connection to the country. And then just a quote from Father Passy: "My land gave me my identity, and if I don't fight for it, then I will be moved out of it, and it will be the loss of my identity." So moving on from Aboriginal spirituality onto, I guess, the second part of religion in Australia post-1945, talking about accounting for Australia's current religious landscape. So the first thing you sort of talk about in part of the current religious landscape might be about Christianity being the major religious tradition. So in our 1901 census, 96% of people identified as Christian. In 2016, this was down to 52.1%, coming down from 61% in 2011. Then you've got some further statistics about denominations. And it wasn't until 1906 that Catholicism overtook Anglican as the biggest denomination of Christianity within Australia. So a lot of this comes from immigration. So if you're ever talking about immigration, one thing you always want to talk about is the abolishment of the White Australia policy in 1973. So prior to this policy, the majority of your immigration came from Italy, Greece, and Eastern Europe post-World War II, which brought in a lot of Catholic and Orthodox immigrants. So between this period before the abolishment of the White Australia policy, there was a 13 million person increase in Australia. And essentially it also allowed a lot of British people to immigrate into Australia. So then, as when the White Australia policy was removed, there was a big influx of Vietnamese refugees, and then conflicts in other parts of the world increased immigration, which caused an increase in non-Christian religions in Australia. So you can see here some statistics on Islam, Hinduism, and Judaism, caused by immigration after the abolition of the White Australia policy. So then just a little bit of some statistics on immigration. So in 2010, Asian immigration surpassed European immigration for the first time, but does not include New Zealand migrants because of our Kiwi neighbours aren't part of the migrants program, because we've got different immigration policies with New Zealand. But essentially you'll see some of the top 10 sources of immigrants and then migrants, and then the red shows you the major religious traditions in those countries to show how our religious landscape has changed. So another thing accounting for our current religious landscape is denominational switching, which is essentially moving from one Christian denomination to another. This is a lot more common in Protestant denominations than more of your conservative ones, such as Catholicism or Orthodox. So with denominational switching, Anglicanism is dropping at the fastest rate, with Pentecostalism growing at the fastest rate. However, you will notice 75% of growth in the Pentecostalism is caused by switching of individuals from another Christian denomination rather than non-Christians moving into the faith. So of the roughly 28% of Christians that switch denominations within a year, 15% of them will leave within 2 years as well. So then per the National Christian Life Survey, only 15% of 20 to 39-year-olds see loyalty to a particular denomination as important, which is another reason for the increase in denominational switching. So then we've also got the rise of New Age religions, which is often a response to secularism, with your New Age religions valuing individual fulfillment rather than rigid traditions that a lot of people believe Christian denominations follow. So there are a lot of faiths that can fall under this umbrella. So from Wiccan, of which there are about 6,600 adherents in Australia, although that is including a 21% decrease. Other New Age religions can include yoga, feng shui, numerology, astrology, and the Mind, Body, Spirit Festival, which normally sees about 91,000 attendees. Then we've also got secularism as another reason for our current religious landscape. So looking at some census data, the category of no religion has seen an increase from 0.8% to 22.3 to 30.1, which is officially a bigger amount than the number of people identifying as Catholic. And then only 9.6% of people chose not to answer the question about religion in the census, which does suggest, although it can't be confirmed, but does suggest religion is still a fairly important aspect to many Australians' lives. And so thinking in 2006, although that was a long time ago, 65% of marriages were non-religious, which is a really important statistic when you think about traditionally Australia has been a fairly religiously affiliated population. And so there's a big push in the current census to pay attention to the question about religious identification. Okay, so moving on to ecumenism. Thinking about ecumenism in SOR, you want to be thinking about it in terms of lots and lots and lots of examples. Whenever you get a question about ecumenism, you want to focus on examples themselves with only a little bit of, theory or explanation behind ecumenism, which is essentially the coming together and development of relationships between Christian denominations. Coming together in the sense of coming together to achieve a purpose rather than necessarily coming together as one. But one of the best examples of this is the foundation of the Uniting Church, which essentially is the coming together of one, where Methodist congregations and around 2/3 of Presbyterians formed the Uniting Church in 1977. Another key example is the National Council of Churches that was founded in 1994, which takes its lead from the World Council of Churches founded in 1937. So the Australian Council of Churches, which is a previous form of the NCCA, passed a resolution to abolish the White Australia policy in 1966. So you can use that as a specific example of how the NCC tries to work towards ecumenism. It runs the national program on refugees and displaced people that's helped refugees from Sudan, Yugoslavia, and Iraq. It runs the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Ecumenical Commission, and its 2006 social justice statement calls for action to eliminate Indigenous poverty. So you can talk about all of those things as examples of ecumenism from the National Council of Churches. And then you've also got the other big example being the New South Wales Ecumenical Council, founded in 1982, that emphasises the central bond with Christ churches through having 16 member churches from 3 denominations that work together through various appeals, such as the Christmas Bowl Appeal, Migrant Sunday, and operating a House of Welcome. Then we've got interfaith dialogue, which is essential in a multi-faith Australia. And your interfaith dialogue is all about promoting better communication and common understanding between different religions in Australia. So again, like ecumenism, you want to be focusing here on different examples that you can use, and most of your responses on interfaith dialogue for your 5 markers will focus on specific examples, or you want to be focusing on specific examples. So we've got the NCCA, which is involved in the national dialogue of Christians, Muslims and Jews. You've got the Council of Christians and Jews, and a specific example of what they did is in 2013, they worked with the Church of Latter-day Saints, which you might more commonly know as Mormons, to put together a Christmas service and create hampers for farmers struggling with the drought. And then you've also got the Columban Centre for Christian-Muslim Relations, which runs educational seminars, including tertiary level academic courses on Islam and interfaith dialogue. And they've got the Golden Rule Post, which is an Australian resource for building and promoting interfaith relations that was officially launched in Parliament in New South Wales on the 19th of June 2013. And then finally, the last bit of our crash course on post-1945, looking at spirituality and reconciliation. You've got the Royal Commission that says reconciliation is absolutely paramount to overcoming injustice. So given that churches tended to play a really big role in the injustice against Indigenous Australians, many churches have become involved in trying to right the wrongs of the past. So as mentioned, you've got the NCCA, which has the National Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Ecumenical Commission, which gives Indigenous members a voice on their faith. You've got the Uniting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Christian Congress, which was formed in 1982, and it released a covenanting statement in 1994 attempting to try and seek forgiveness. And then you've also got, there's been a week of prayer for reconciliation between Christians, Jews, Islamics, and Buddhist groups since 1993 as well. So that was a really quick crash course about quick revision about post-1945. Remembering here, you only need to be able to write 5 marks worth of a question for any of these aspects. So with each of the slides we looked at, you want to be able to write at least 5 marks, at least one 5-mark question on each slide. So the last part of today's lecture is looking at specific skills for studies of religion. So thinking about types of studying, this is not religion specific, just in general. You can be any combination of learning types, and it can vary from subject to subject. So you want to be utilizing, no matter what learning type you are, active study techniques to enrich your studying and make it easier to remember. And then my big advice, do practice papers until you literally feel like you're psychic enough to guess the questions because you've read that many of them. Practice papers is, the solution to any problem in terms of studying for the HSC. So thinking about poor time management, particularly in religion exams, because there is a lot of writing. So you want to make it more challenging to write in your practice sessions. This can make it feel a lot breezier in the actual exam. You might have already done this. If you haven't, you may have seen someone who's done it, people who tape batteries to their pens when they write practice essays to make it harder to write in the practice sessions. But then when you go into the exam without the weights on your pen, it becomes a lot easier to write and you feel a lot breezier. You can also sort of see some people will do this writing on a towel. It's meant to make writing harder. Essentially, if you think that's going to help you to do it harder in your practice and then make your actual exam feel a lot easier, go ahead, give it a go, see how it goes. But also with that, don't overwork yourself. Don't try and tape like 12 batteries onto your pen. If you've never had a single battery in your pen in your life, because your hand is just going to get sore, it's going to cramp, and it's not going to be beneficial. So be smart about that. Goes without saying, Don't waste time if you're not getting something. It sounds obvious, but a lot of people, including me, make the mistake of spending way too much time on trying to answer a question when in reality you just don't know the question. It's not coming to you. You're not going to get it. If this happens, highlight the question, circle it, do something, mark it so you can come back to it at the end if you've got time. Otherwise, you're just wasting marks after that question that you might be getting if you spend a little bit more time on them. In religion, this tends to come up with a multiple choice. So if you don't know a multiple choice question, mark it, guess an answer, and move on. And it's normally best to attempt the questions in descending order of confidence or knowledge to try and avoid this issue as well. So, something to think about, the worst case scenario about what if you can't finish an essay. I would say your marker tends to care more about writing a completed essay as opposed to one with more content. So this seems a little bit disingenuous, but remember your marker cares about cohesion and argument just as much as they do about content. So if you are in your exam and you notice that you're running out of time, finish the sentence you're working on as well as your paragraph and write out a really quick conclusion. If you're really running low on time, it is better to have a conclusion than to have those few extra sentences of content. This gives your essay a cohesive feel and it feels completed, and you can get a few more marks maybe on just having a good essay structure. So if you want to write out your responses with perfect clarity, you need to practice. You need to practice writing those essays until that they come to you naturally. If you want to cross something out, put a line through it instead of scribbling it out. Just in case you want to go back and use it, you can sort of mark it on your pages actually going to use this. And then in relation to time management, if you need extra paper, ask for it in advance. Not once you run out, so that you save time and avoid running over the lines and around the edge of the page. Because I don't know if any of you have been spoken to about how scanning works for the HSC, but you'll notice on your HSC writing booklets, there is a black rectangle that outlines all of your pages. If you write outside of that, it won't get scanned. That black rectangle is there to scan only within what's within that rectangle. So if you're on the last page of the writing booklet and you know you have a whole nother paragraph to go, put your hand up, get the extra paper, so you're not wasting time sitting around for somebody to come and give you a piece of paper. So, as you know, being confident in your exams is a big factor in doing well. The more confident you feel, the better you feel, and the less likely you are to be stressed, which is your absolute best game plan for success. So we want to be able to assess confidence when we're studying to make sure you've got a well-rounded knowledge of all the topics and all the dot points and syllabus points you need to know about. So you think about this in terms of red, yellow, and green, thinking about a traffic-like system of assessing your confidence. When you're studying, keep going with different areas until they are at the green level. Don't spend too much time revising topics or subtopics that you already know are at the green level, because then you're just sort of wasting time when you could be gaining marks practicing things that are at the red or the yellow level. So a little bit about planning pre-HSC. You've reached the holidays, your study is going to look a lot different. Ultimately, every student's study plan is going to look different, but I think sort of a good way to go about it is to first decide which subjects you want to tackle. Always want to think about pair two opposite subjects together. There's a lot of research that suggests doing that helps you remember the content better. So think about a really content heavy subject against maybe a calculation subject. So essentially like one of your humanities, thinking about like SWR, English, history against, maths, physics, bio, and pairing your opposite subjects together to work on in one day. And then with the exception of a few subjects, you want your study to be fairly even. So there are going to be some subjects that you feel like you're going to need a little bit more time on. For me, I really always struggled with English, was not my thing, did not love it. So for me, I always wanted to spend a little bit more time doing my English stuff. So that was my exception on the one subject I would spend a little bit more time on. But in general, you do want your topics and your subjects to be fairly easy. So work backwards, start with what subject you want to spend the most amount of time on, block that into your calendar, then evenly fill out the rest of your subjects. So then finally, if it gets overwhelming, talk to someone. It's okay to have to talk to someone and get some stuff off your chest. In terms of just some final words, don't discuss your responses after the exam. It can be so tempting, but it would just stress you out. If you are on any discussion groups and you know you're going to get stressed out if people are talking about the exam, don't look at those discussion groups. It's fine. Once you get out of that exam, there's nothing you can do about it. Honestly, overthinking will just lead to you being stressed, being worried, and spending the next month until you get the results in stress. Take it from me, I worked out after I had done my English exam that I wrote one of my essays on the wrong question, and I did nothing but stress about it for literally like a month. And you know what? It was fine in the end. Still got a band 6. It was literally fine. So most of the time when you're overthinking things, or you're trying to discuss them, or you read something online, it's going to cause you stress about something you don't need to stress about. Take it from me, I promise you, it'll all work out. You never know what happens behind the scenes in the HSC Marketing Centre, so no stress. Don't overthink it. Just because you didn't answer in the exact same way as someone else doesn't necessarily mean you were wrong, doesn't mean they are wrong. Just means you could have 2 different approaches to answering the same question and both of them could be right. And then as students, you tend to over amplify faults and failures. Even you may not have even lost a single mark for doing them. So particularly with humanities subjects where there is no particularly right answer, it's not like walking out of a maths exam and someone's gotten 6 and you've gotten 40, where one of those answers will be right and the other one has to be wrong. With your humanities subjects, you can have literally 2 completely different responses and still both get full marks for them. So don't think about it too much, don't stress. If you get into a cycle of over amplifying your faults or your failures, talk to someone about it, get it off your chest, and you'll get through this. I believe in you. All the HSC students before you will tell you that it is so sweet to hear somebody say pens down for the last time and to feel yourself on the other side of the mountain of the HSC. So you can get through this. I believe in you. But that's it for today. Thank you guys for coming to today's lecture, and best of luck for HSC exams. You'll all do so well. Just keep in mind everything we talked about today, and you'll be able to ace all of your studies of religion responses.